I'm Dorothea, welcome. Great to have you here to help us celebrate Susie Pratt's wonderful new collection of essays, More or Less, essays from a year of no buying. And joining Susie is Nate Stucky. So I will introduce them in a second. Just a few preliminary notes before I do that. Masks. So we do encourage you still to wear a mask while we're spending time here in this space together for a kind of extended period, not you guys. So when if you want to ask a question, take the mask off. You don't absolutely have to, but if you want to, we have masks back there. We are encouraging you still to do that. I found that it's often surprising who is still protecting someone at home. And so while that's the case, we try to set our policy to protect the most vulnerable, right? And then anyone who's joining us online, I was really happy to see that there are a whole bunch of you, 50 or so. Welcome to you. And you can join the Q&A by clicking on the Q&A button that's at the bottom of your screen. So anytime you have a question as it comes to you, just click on that and type it in, and we'll keep an eye on the questions online, even as we take questions from the room. So I have a couple thank yous. A shout out to Whole Earth Center, our beloved Whole Earth Center, Whole Food store in town, independent co-op. It's really great, and they help us get word out. And the seminary, Princeton Theological Seminary, also has been helpful, so thanks to them. Shout out to Margaret, my dear friend Margaret, who put us in touch, put Susie and me in touch. We wouldn't be here without you, Margaret. So that's all great. So that's it for housekeeping. On to our guests. Susannah Pratt. Susie comes to us from Chicago, where she's a writer whose work has been published in Literary Mama, Motherwell, The Mindful Word, Chicago Parent, Under the Gum Tree, Essay Daily, and The Week, among other places. Some of those I have to check out. I don't know them yet. If or when you read More or Less, which is her first book, you'll also meet her husband and 3 children. And I just wanted to say how much I admire how delicately you handle bringing their voices in without ever overexposing them. It's really beautifully done. A big thank you goes to, maybe there are differences of opinion. So I would like to hear about that. All right. Thank you also, Nate, for joining us. Nate serves as director of the Farminary Project at Princeton Theological Seminary. He just put onions, arugula, and something else. Peas in the ground today, may they not freeze. And grew up on a farm in Kansas, which seems to have shaped his research and teaching, as these explore theologically the intimacy among humanity, soil, and Sabbath. He is the author of Wrestling with Rest, inviting youth to discover the gift of Sabbath. So just very quickly before I hand over the mic, I have long forgotten the name of the economist from Latin America whose talk I listened to for maybe 15 years or so ago, but I will always remember his argument, which was something like this: if we cling to an ideology of economic growth, we will produce monsters. We know that if a body were to always keep growing, so this was his analogy, he said, if our bodies were always to keep growing, it would become just that. It would become a monster, right? Imagine something that never stops growing. And if we demand the same of our economies and of our planet in support of endless consumption, then we will end up with a monstrous world. I was reminded of this often when reading Susie's splendidly written, often funny, always thoughtful and incisive essays about doing with less, about us who have so very much, and you're so careful about making clear for whom you speak, learning to live differently for the sake of our planet, our souls, and our commonwealth in the literal sense. The wealth we hold in common, or better, should learn to hold more in common. So please join me in welcoming Susie and Nate.
Thank you very much, Dorothea. It's great to be here. As Dorothea said, my name is Nate Stucky. I serve as director of the Farminary And I should give the quick backstory of how I had the privilege of getting roped into this, which is a good friend of mine, Aaron Raska, is an alum of the seminary who is on staff at the church where Susie attends. And so I got an email out of the blue from Aaron weeks ago and said, hey, there's this thing, are you interested? And I said, well, yes, I think I am interested. And so it's been delightful to come along on the ride as we share at least a couple of distinctions. And the one I'll lift up to begin with is that we have both written dangerous books. And I'll define my terms here. So I wrote a book on Sabbath. You wrote a book on not buying things, which then automatically leads people to presuppose you're an expert at those things, which we may not be and wouldn't presume to be. But have thoroughly enjoyed this. And then one more vignette, and then obviously I have questions for you. This last weekend, I was traveling. I had a speaking engagement in Nebraska, but it was in the same town where my sister lives. So it was a combination of intense time with family, 3 speaking engagements on Sunday, more time with other parts of the family on Monday, flying home on Tuesday, here on Wednesday. I didn't get to open this book until the flight home on Tuesday. And I think I'm pretty good at falling asleep on an airplane. And I couldn't. I flew home exhausted, more or less, all day on Tuesday, but I just kept reading. So thanks. And occasionally may have embarrassed myself by laughing out loud while reading, but it's all right. So to begin with, as you know by now, and as you name in the book, everybody wants to know the backstory. And what led to this. And I wonder if you could kind of start there. What led you to embark on the adventure that led to the writing of these essays?
Thank you, Nate. And thanks everybody for coming tonight, and to all the thank yous that Dorothea already extended. I want to add a thank you to Dorothea for hosting us. So I will jump in and answer Nate's question as to the backstory of the book. So in 2018, my really game family agreed to undertake a year of no buying, and I led them there via PowerPoint presentation, but also like just maternal snit. I was just like, we have too much stuff. And in the PowerPoint presentation, I made them guess how many Christmas ornaments we had and how many books were in our house. And but to push that back even farther, that I was feeling just because of a sense of overwhelm. And I will just say, as somebody who pays attention to language, because I like language, I've noticed recently that overwhelm is starting to appear as a noun in language, like material overwhelm or a sense of overwhelm is appearing as a noun all over the place, and as opposed to an adjective or verb. And I think it is a sort of phenomena. It's like a thing that's happening to us, this overwhelm. And I think I was feeling it on a lot of levels, but in relation to our stuff. So I convinced these guys to try this. There were rules. I had a big discussion with the editor about whether the rules should have been in the book, and they're not. But for instance, the boys, we have 3 boys, and they could buy things with their own money. And we still did birthday celebrations, but they were experiences. And we did buy things over the course of the year, and the essays kind of try to get at that. This was not uncomplicated. But before we bought, we had a series of questions we asked ourselves about, whether we could borrow something or fix it. So it was really just an attempt to consume less. So we did it for a year and I did it with no intention of writing a book. But as I told Nate, the year just served as kind of a muse. The more we stepped out of the flow of consumption, the more I saw things I wanted to write about and comment on. And so when the world shut down, I wrote a book. And here it is.
Conveniently, the world shut down and you could write. But there's more to the backstory, right? And part of this is it involves you at the dump. Is that what
The
they call
dump
it?
for us.
At the dump in not Illinois,
No.
which state?
Upstate New York.
Upstate New York, and a dumpster.
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
tell a bit of that story?
Yeah, so every summer, our family goes to the Adirondack Mountains, and during that time, there's no trash pickup where we stay in the Adirondacks, so anything you produce in the form of waste, you have to take to the dump, and you have to sort it out. And I've long been uncomfortable with the dump, as the essay kind of details, but during the year of no buying, I was really just like, it was just made clear to me the massive amount of waste that this small town in the Adirondacks was generating. And so there's a moment I'm actually going to read from that essay that I should say one other bit of backstory. So the essay is called Dirty Hands, and it's sort of a braided essay about different stories of how people deal with waste. And in it, I reference the trash pirates, who are these young people who volunteer after music festivals like Coachella, Lollapalooza. They go around and they pick up and sort all the waste, and they try to draw people's attention to the waste. And one of them said in an article in the New York Times, the first time you see trash on that magnitude, you have a trash moment. And so that gets referenced in what I'm about to read. Okay. Although most people understand the impulse for our year of no buying, when hearing about our adventure, they often ask us why. They're looking for the origin story. I believe that moment on the steps may be it. Sorry, I should say the steps. I was standing on the steps of the dumpster at the dump, throwing things in it and thinking like, what are we doing? It was, I think, my own personal trash moment. After launching that chair into its long future among our planet's trash, I could see only two options. The first was despair, my default response in situations like this. I can't unsee the C&D dumpster, but I can't unown all that I have. I can only chase the problem around and around in my head. The second option is denial, which I like to alternate with despair just to mix it up. It's quite possible that we came home from the dump that day, piled in a boat, and pulled our kids and their friends around the lake in an inner tube that one day will undoubtedly end up in the C&D dumpster. Despair and denial are downstream responses. They're just me splashing around waist deep in the mess I've made. Perched on those precarious little stairs, standing in the middle of the giant mess we'd collectively made, I needed a third way, an upstream approach. This, of course, turned into our year of no buying. Our logic? We can't get out of the mess we're in, but we can stop making it worse. It was a first step. So I think, to your point, that was maybe sort of the epiphany or the moment that I was like, we have to change things.
Thank you. I love this, and a Farminary moment that flashed through my head as you're reading this idea of a trash moment. So we do extensive composting at the farm, and our facilities teams brings leaves from the main campus that functions as the carbon source. And this Monday, one of our history professors is going to take her class. It's a course on ancient history. They're going to go to the farm, and they're going to excavate the leaf pile, because it's never just leaves in the leaf pile. And you can learn a lot about society by its trash.
Yes.
And that, I mean, it's one of the sort of trails of exploration that you're on in this, as kind of the damning evidence of the waste stream. Yeah. So that's amazing and terrifying. So we talked previously about the genre of the book, and that it's easy for folks to assume, well, this must be a memoir on this year of no buying, but you decided not to do that. It is instead, a collection of essays that emerged from that year. Can you talk about why you decided to go collection of essays instead of memoir? Yeah,
it's a great question. It's actually a question I got asked a lot, especially by people who are trying to help me develop the book. The cheeky answer I give is that not buying things is just not that interesting, right? That our, a year of no buying is actually not the stuff of memoir. It just doesn't lend itself to that. But I think, to extrapolate out from that, what I'm really saying is that the activity of the year interested me less than the realizations of the year or the thought processes of the year. So the stories, there's a few in here that take the shape of vignette, but really, I would say most of them are reflection. They really are a kind of meditation on some dimension of the experience. So there might be like a catalytic moment from the year that launches us. So because of that, it felt like it sort of leaned into the genre of essay more. It's not maybe the most savvy marketing choice. And there is a genre called memoir and essay. So Barbara Kingsolver wrote a book like this about farming, of Animal Vegetable Miracle.
Yeah.
And she structures hers chronologically, and it kind of falls more into that memoir and essay. But this just didn't end up breaking out that way. And it also didn't have sort of like momentum of activity or chronology to me that made it make sense. I will say it was a little bit helpful though in structuring the collection to think chronologically. So there is like a loose, like the Christmas essay comes toward the end, but it's really not the driving force. You're right. It's more the themes of the book.
Yeah, well, for what it's worth, I thought it worked. I think it works. I mean, you sort of get these snapshots of the year,
yeah,
and then draw out some of the implications of what you're experiencing during that year. And as evidenced, at the dump, the implications are far-reaching. I think one of the things you do really compellingly in the book is describing the tension between a few things. First, our awareness of the massive waste created by our lives as consumers. Secondly, our impulse to want to do something about it. And then third, the recognition that this is a global, massive system, and the sort of like, oh crud, what can any individual or family do about it? So you have that sort of confluence of tension. I'm curious, to what extent were you aware of that tension before the year? What did the year do to that tension, and where are you now with that tension?
That's such a good question. So, right. I think that's the modern problem. I think that everybody sitting here, everybody online feels this exact thing you're talking about, this awareness of huge structural inequity or environmental challenges. And as someone said to me recently, the effort to live a human-sized life, to not try to address every single challenge or to recognize your own limits in addressing them. I think it was a driving motivation for undertaking the year because I had to do something with the sense of overwhelm I was feeling. But I don't think, and you can tell me if you think otherwise, I don't think the tension gets resolved anywhere in the book. And there's some essays, probably the essay that's least satisfying to me still as a writer is the one called Mine to Choose, which is about the fact that we are inundated with choices. But what gave rise to the essay was that I had seen an article in the New York Times Magazine on Sunday about, keep life simple, eat a bialy for breakfast. It was a very sweet essay. I actually give a big shout out at the end of the essay. But it came behind a cover of a starving Yemeni child. And this idea that we could ever have too much choice and that was our problem as we're looking at this picture of the starving child was just paralyzing to me. And I end up kind of coming in the essay to the point of saying the author's right. Presence, simplicity, responsiveness where you are is one strategy. But I have like some misgivings about that. It's insufficient. And so I think you picked up on the tension that's in the book, and it shows up in a few other places too. And I don't know how to think. I don't have much wisdom on it, except to just say there was some value probably in acknowledging it for me. And just, I do think the year felt productive in that it felt like an act of resistance, at least to some of what is upsetting about the world.
And has that sense of tension evolved or shifted in any way? I mean, there was the living through the year,
right? Then
there's the writing about, and now sort of being confronted with it all over again through this book process. Does it sit more or less the same as it has, or do you think that tension has taken on a different shape in some way?
Yeah, I think the tension's still there. Maybe that's one of the things I love most about having a book, though, is the notion that it contributes to a conversation. So it's contributing to a larger conversation or shaping a larger conversation. And to the extent that the book is really doing that or can really do that, that scratches some kind of itch that feels a little larger than just our family not buying anything. I also think having a book puts me into conversation with other people who are like-minded or acting in similar ways, and that is also, that alleviates some of that tension too, because you think you're not alone. I mean, we're not alone in being uncomfortable in the way we live. I mean, you probably experience this with food production. People don't want to buy processed food, but like we're caught in these systems that are larger than we are, and at least seeing someone else who sees what you see feels good.
Yeah. I mean, so one of my primary vocations is as teacher, and the act of teaching presupposes the inflicting, is this the correct word, of tension. Like you have to sort of allow a student to recognize there's some domain unexplored or misunderstood or not,
Right.
And in that respect, it is very easy for me to see this book playing a really productive pedagogical role in the, in some sense, provoking the tension and providing a conversation partner. But doing so Dorothea said it so beautifully, like in such a sensitive way, in just the right doses of self-deprecation, from my perspective, bringing the family in, the humor, just incredibly accessible, and yet not leaving us alone. In both senses of the term, like we have a companion, and it's like just a little bit.
Yeah, good idea.
It's I mean this as a compliment for sure. So your book's not only about stuff, about consuming. There's also some clear calendar implications here, and I wonder if you would read a snippet from the eloquently titled essay, "Oh Crap."
Oh, that one.
Yeah.
I would be glad to. Okay, so I would be glad to read this. I know just this part you're thinking of. The "Oh Crap" essay is an essay that is about swag that my husband brought home from an industry conference. Well, annually brings home from an industry conference, and how much I hate the swag and how it just lies around after he brings it home. And it's the counterpoint in the essay is some dear family friends from Germany who were visiting, that we have no time to see them because it's September and their flight gets canceled. And so in this year of no buying, they find a way to get these gifts to us that they've brought, these homemade gifts that are very personally and thoughtfully designated for our family. And it is such a counterpoint, like I said, to the swag, which is just designed for anybody and everybody, and to really just remind you of the person who provided you the swag. So it's a gift. Swag is a gift about the giver, and we were getting gifts that were about the receiver. But in this essay, there's a whole sort of undercurrent of pace, of speed, and I think that's in a few places in the book. So I'm just going to read this one piece here. My family's life is not only filled with stuff; it's just filled, period. And there are times when we fill it to such a point that spontaneity and serendipity are completely out of the question. This was the situation in which we found ourselves this September. Missed flight? No time to see our friends, or to borrow a term from another era, receive them in our home. It's all tied up together. We have too much, we move too fast.
We have too much, we move too fast. I don't think that resonates with anyone in Princeton. It calls to mind something I have regularly told students at the farm, and that is that pace and perception are indelibly linked. And that, for better or worse, whatever the case, if you're driving by a landscape at 60 miles an hour, you're going to see different things than if you're walking by. But I wonder to what extent that rings true, this connection of pace and perception. And do you feel like, to what extent did this year slow you down? It's interesting that the book was then written at a moment of slowing down.
Yeah, right.
And what was unveiled to you through this?
Another good question. So I love what you just said about pace and perception. And what's ringing true to me is that, so we all move at such an accelerated pace. I mean, modern people do, but I think especially affluent or privileged modern people move especially at a rapid fire pace. And I think that generates an attitude of scarcity, right? So you feel like time is scarce, and then because you feel time is scarce, you think other things are scarce, and it just develops this notion of scarcity in relation to all our resources that characterizes the way we think, like, quick, get that, hold on to it. and I think this examples from our life before we did our year of no buying, we'd be driving to a soccer game and somebody realizes they forgot a water bottle, like there's Target, go get another water bottle, right? Like it's just this kind of quick, there's no time to go back home, there's no time, and that lends itself to the consumption. And so when you change your pace and you slow down, you do perceive abundance, I think. You perceive an abundance of time, but then you perceive the abundance of things you have. If you just stop and look, there was a water bottle under the seat in the car, right? That you just bought, right? So I think I think that's what's coming through to me as I think about pace. Really.
Yeah. And there is within this that this sense that our obsession with stuffing our lives to the brim, we ironically miss out on a lot. It seems you were able to perceive some things through the no buying. Spoiler alert, you've returned to buying. I know. We should talk more about that. But what is, if you think about the things that were unveiled through this journey, and I would say both journeys, both the journey of the year of no buying and the journey of writing these essays.
Yeah.
What comes to mind as far as the things that have been made clear to you or things that are unveiled?
I think one of the primary things that I came to realize is that creativity and consumption are opposing forces. Mm-hmm. The more you spend time consuming, the less time you are likely to create or to devote to creation. So I don't even mean creating the thing, but I just mean if you're not buying or taking care of the things you buy, you can make music, or you can grow things, or there's so much space for creativity, but creativity also takes time. And so I think when we fill our lives with all these things, and then we are maintaining the things, and then storing the things, and then cleaning the things, and that what gets edged out more than anything is our sense of creativity. And that's probably why there's a book, honestly. I mean, I think there was time for me to just see things I hadn't seen, and then time to write about them, and then really time to write about them because of the pandemic. But even prior to that, just many of these early essays were written in the year themselves, or early versions of essays, I should say, were written in the year of no buying itself, and then the year following. So. And I also saw this creativity come out in other ways, just in terms of resourcefulness, because we really didn't want to buy things. So ways we found to work around and to repair things we hadn't repaired before. Borrowing became a part of our life, which should be a part of all of our lives, but is not. And the North Shore of Chicago, at least, I'm going to guess maybe in Princeton, so shared resources, creativity, those are some of the things that emerged as really important, and that get just totally crowded out when you're just consuming and caring for your things. Yeah.
It strikes me that one of the most poignant questions that comes through these essays, and I don't know that you ever ask it explicitly, but it's just hovering under the surface, needling us in a really productive way, is this question of like, what kind of life do we actually want?
Right. Yeah.
And do we want the life that equals endless consumption?
Right.
Or can we even imagine another way?
Yeah.
And so I wonder how you would answer this question now. What kind of life do you want?
Can you know what I mean?
Just paint to me.
I think it's a great question. I mean, one of the other unresolved sort of tensions or pieces of the book is that our things aren't evil. Like a lot of what we have is dear to us and important to us, and defines us. I mean, one of the kind of critical sentences I think in the book, or one of the things I say I'm not clear on, is whether we are defined or confined by what we own. And I don't mean to define it in a negative way either. I mean, there are chapters in here that are about heirlooms or silly things that are important to our family. So I don't think I want to encourage people to have like some sort of minimalist, completely anti-consumption sort of hermit-like life, where you just go off the grid and live in a bare shack with your IKEA shelf in a plant or something, right? Like it just, I don't have that idea, but I do want people to have an abundance of time. I do want them to be discerning about the things that they do love and then care for those things. That's a big, I know you were asking about takeaways from the year, and that was a huge takeaway for us. It's just like the things that we have that matter to us really matter to us. And then you want to invest care in them. And like, I could just embarrass all my children who are sitting here, but they, have, one of them has a water bottle that he loves dearly and has had forever, and another backpack. And the idea that you would invest in certain things and care deeply about fewer things rather than trying to acquire many things. I think that's the life we would like to live, because then it does leave space for creativity and community.
Yeah. Again, one of the questions hovering around the entire book, and I think it lingers within what led you to the book to begin with, is this question: do we have our stuff, or does our stuff have us?
Right.
And that, I mean, that you at one point you shared in conversations like that sense of you walk into the living room or wherever, and it's just like you're tripping over all the stuff,
right.
And kids contribute to this. No offense, kids. But that sense of like, no, it's the stuff is taken over, and
right.
How do we respond to this? You tell this story in the book that includes the line, Elliot is attempting to clean his new shoes. And I found this to be unexpectedly moving. And I wonder if you could tell the story about what led to that line, and then I can talk about how I got choked up on the plane, or not. But yeah, tell this story, because it does, I think, speak to this notion of does our stuff have us, or do we have it? And this was a moment of care.
Yeah, this is a really sweet story that will totally embarrass Elliot. Apologies in advance. But so this essay comes in the middle of the book. It's called Footprint. And in a way, I feel like this essay is me sort of stamping my foot a little bit at the year and trying to be like, we're going to have some stuff. Because up until then, I think, I know the essays have been very diagnostic and suggestive of why we shouldn't, but the essay called Footprint is about the notion of ecological footprint, but then sort of it's playing with this idea because it's also about Elliot's basketball shoes. So it's the year of no buying. We haven't really bought much. And Elliot is getting ready to go to camp, and there's a hole in his shoe. You realize the sole of his shoe. And I was like, how long have you had a hole in your shoe? He was like, oh, most of camp. So we ordered him some new basketball shoes. He goes to camp. The shoes get all muddy on the way in. Anyway, I'm like busy, moving fast. I come downstairs, and I look, and these muddy basketball shoes are on the counter. And I'm like, Elliot, what are you doing? And I realize that he's trying to clean the new shoes. He had gotten these shoes and they'd gotten muddy at camp, and he holds out this paper towel that's just like ragged with dishwashing liquid. And my takeaway from that is there are things that give us joy, that matter to us, that are worth, and kind of what I was just saying, that worth investing in. Maybe you should say more about why you got choked up.
Well, I mean, my sense of it, and at some point Elliot can speak for himself, but since you don't have a microphone, you're stuck with us. But I think what was so moving to me about it was there was this sense that a transformation had happened, and that at least for that pair of shoes, Elliot had a relationship that he may not have had with prior shoes, because you were willing to go on this sort of radical journey that opened up the possibility of a different kind of relationship with stuff. And yeah, I mean, one parent to another, I'm just like, yeah, good job, Elliot. Anyway, so one more question, and then we can open it up to others and some questions. And don't get any funny ideas, boys. But when we're having these conversations about waste, about ecological footprint, about any of these sort of sobering and sometimes frightening things, I do think we usually have the long view in mind. We're thinking generationally, I think, at our best. And so based on this year of no buying, your experience of writing this book, I wonder what hopes or dreams you have for, Lord willing, your grandchildren one day.
It's a great question. Well, I will tell you this story briefly. So our church is undertaking a year of buying less, kind of inspired by the book, but I think just by life. And so they were talking about the book, and so an older gentleman came up to me from the congregation, and he was like, this is not good for the economy. He's right, I suppose. But I guess what I appreciated about what he's saying is that I don't think my hope is for the complete collapse of capitalism, or I mean, we'll see. Things could be worse, but I don't think that that's my vision. That somehow we all are living in some alternative society. But I do think what's possible is that there are these big areas of excess in our life and our existence that don't need to be there, that we could right now begin to attend to, and they do look like repairing things. They do look like sharing our resources. They look like making more of our own things. They look like more time spent in community. And I think that within a generation, if we could reclaim some of that excess and that consuming for those other things, for, like I said, creativity and community, and if we could attend to our waste, if we could be willing to be dependent on one another and share with one another, that would be my wish for my grandchildren, that they would be in a world where those practices were more evident than what we see here today.
Yeah, I love it. So I think we'll go ahead and open up for some questions. And Dorothea, do you have a preferred method here?
Simply that you guys share a mic, and I'll come around with one of the mics so that the folks online can hear the questions from the room.
Great.
So anyone who wants to start us off.
So it's interesting when thinking about what your theme is, and it occurred to me that the connection between oversaturation applies to things and food. And when you look at the proliferation of all of the ready-made foods that people take in, they don't taste. And it goes down into their bodies, enlarges their bodies, because there's no satisfaction. There's no physical sensory satisfaction. And the same with things. If you just have this constant, railroading of things going through your life, you're not taking the time to actually sensorially get satisfaction from it. Cleaning your shoes means that you have to smell the dirt. You have to smell what you're using to clean it. You have to feel the stuff that's coming off your shoe, the dirtying of the thing that you're using. So your whole senses are involved. When your whole senses are involved, there's a tremendous satisfaction and food that is long lasting. So that if all that stuff goes past you, there's no, I'm just repeating myself, there's no, I'm stroking myself. Right. It's like going into hot water. You don't get that nourishment for your soul and for your body. So that it applies to other things in our lives. And for me, seeing people consume so much food and awful food, and doing their bodies such a disservice, is the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because you're from what you're talking about, it's the same.
I think that's right. I think also when you use the word oversaturation, is this on, by the way? Okay, good. When you use the word oversaturation, too, it brought this to mind for me, and this is something we've talked a little bit about, but one of the things that stepping outside consumption did for me was to wake me up to how saturated or immersed we are in a culture of marketing, how much we're being marketed to all the time. And there's an essay in which I talk about, we were in a points program, and we got this notice that our reward points at a store were going to expire. And I was like, oh, maybe we should buy some. Right? It just, they know, they're so expert in marketing. people are so expert at anticipating our need before we, or creating a need, and then anticipating what objections we might have to that need, and then and so that's the other kind of saturation. It's just the messages you're in that you, like, you're right, you can't stop and think for yourself, like what, or to use your metaphor, to taste or experience, or you're just kind of caught up in this messaging. And so when you artificially remove yourself by something like an exercise, like no buying, that's one of the only ways I can imagine that you can begin to say, like, wow. And I have a friend who's doing this with our church this year, and he was like, I just see how many emails I get daily, almost hourly, from some of these companies. He's not actually engaging the email because he doesn't want to buy anything, but typically he would be like, oh, I don't know, West Elm 50% off, you know, right? And so anyway, I just, that also comes to mind in terms of saturation.
So
And it's addictive.
while you all mull your other questions, we'll jump to a question from someone who's joined us online, Sarah, who thanks you for sharing knowledge and wisdom this year, and is asking, what transformations did you and your family experience with how you view and participate in community during this year of no buying, if any?
That's another good question. I sort of loosely alluded to it, but we did borrow quite a bit. And it's a very funny thing in our neighborhood, our town. People are really happy to lend. They're not so interested in being the one who has to borrow, right? They'd much rather be like, oh, of course, take my wheelbarrow. But they don't want to have to come knock on the door and ask for a wheelbarrow. And so we just had to do that. If we really didn't want to buy things, we had to borrow. And people were so happy, and then they got engaged. And my hope is that for some people it was liberating, like they also felt like they could borrow. And I also came to learn about many communities that purposefully and intentionally do this. Other neighborhoods where, like, they'll make a list, like, you have a snow blower, you have an extension ladder, you have this, like, and they'll share. So being in community around our things, I think, was transformational for us, and that would be something I would love us to kind of get over as a society that's so, you know, this is my house and I need my snowblower for my driveway. You know, like, if we could begin to do more resource sharing and be in community that way, I think that would be great. I think also there's just more, I sound like a broken record, but there was more time. So, you know, because we weren't, consuming takes an incredible amount of your time, and as does the care of your things and our things. And so with more time, I think we had more time to spend with people, with each other. And then because, like, for birthdays, we were doing experiences, we spent more time together on those things too. But I feel like maybe you should also speak to community, because I think that's a big part of your work, Nate, and just say a little bit about what you do in building community at Farminary.
Well, I'm sure. I mean, this sense, though, of the amount of time that it takes to consume, to care for the things that we have, rings very true. And then this question of, do our habits of consumption lend toward our interaction and an awareness of our interdependence?
Right.
Or do they lend themselves to our isolation and a false sense of independence? And so, you know, so at the farm today, it was me, it was Emma Balecki, our Farminary fellow, it was 5 seminary students and 2 university students, all planting onions together this morning. And I am certain that if any of that cohort gets to partake of those onions later in the year, they're going to taste different. They're going to taste better. Whether they like onions or not, they're going to taste better. And so hopefully that's a participation in a cycle of consumption that is, first of all, over a months-long time span.
Right. Yes.
Participating in the life of soil that is on a, you know, generations-long time cycle, and then has as its goal really a shared meal, which is such a beautiful image of a kind of consumption that draws people together, that embodies an intentional interdependence, and that, I think, cultivates gratitude along the way as well. So
yeah,
was just gonna say, without, again, spoiler alert, we do start buying. We were joking that I should come in today with like a price tag hanging out. I just picked it up at the airport. But that we do start buying again, and there is an epilogue, and I won't go into detail, but it ends with a sort of communal meal feel to it, and just that holding on to that piece of the year, even though it's almost impossible to hold on to the not buying.
Did you in any way quantify what you didn't buy, or do you have a sense of what that is? Because, and I'm saying that, I think it also might depend on where you are kind of just in developmentally with your family. You know, I think there's a period where one might be getting things so that you can have the big meals and buying stuff at Bed Bath & Beyond, like with abandonment. But I think then maybe people get to a point in their lives where they really are tapering off with that. Maybe.
Yeah, right.
But I'm just curious if you
It's a
could
great
talk
question.
about that, because I can't quite, I wonder about that for myself, you know, like what would the things be that I would walk by or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, a really fair question. I think it's absolutely was part of our story is that we were a family of 5. We were coming out of what I call like the plastic years, you know, like Legos everywhere. And I think that was a huge part of it. I will also say one other thing that I think is good about your question. There are many people who undertake this exercise and document the financial implications of it. We didn't touch that. Like we didn't try to, so I know that's not what you're asking, but like we didn't look at money saved. And I think sometimes that is a different exercise for different reasons, you know, but what we didn't buy was everything that we were mindlessly buying when I look back on it. So books. So we used the library exclusively in the year, and books were big ones for us. Cheap clothes, like, you know, like just needing things getting worn out, or just impulse buys at Target, things like that. I think quick fixes for appliances and other things where we would have just gone and bought a coffee maker. We actually like spent time like, you know, with a toothpick and try to clean out the filter and the, you know, like trying to save the coffee maker we had. So I think a lot of it was either impulse buys, places where we tended toward excess, or things we would have bought just because we didn't want to take the time to fix it. I don't know if that's a real satisfactory answer, but those were the kind of buckets I would say.
Hello, my name is Angel, and this event actually, I feel like it's like been divine intervention.
Good.
I like to thank you because it sounds like the things that you had said is a path I'm inspiring to go down, especially during the shutdown and everything that's happened. So I thank you, and I can't wait to read your book, and I thank you for the invitation to come here. I realized that during the slowing down of life, I got to realize what do I really enjoy in life, and I started doing the garden and raising some chickens and cooking food with my husband from the garden vegetables and fruits that we were able to harvest, and it just feels, and just purging the things in our home. It's just too much stuff. So listening to you, it's like, wow, I was meant to be here. It really feels refreshing that there's more people out there that I hope it really does make a difference, because as the woman up here was saying about food, it's literally the inside and out. And I really have been struggling with the quick fixes, the quick food, because not having enough time. And now that with the shutdown, it's like, oh, I have all this time. But it's much more deeper. And I realize it's just so much stuff. And we need to slow down. So I really thank you. I'm looking forward to reading your book. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm so grateful you're here, and I'm glad that this book is speaking to you. And I will say, this is just because you mentioned the shutdown. I'll just say one interesting part of the book's journey is, you were asking its backstory. I had a real moment of crisis about it in the book, not the exercise of no buying, in the beginning of the pandemic because I was like, it's totally irrelevant. Like the whole world was changing, and this was in the beginning of the pandemic, mind you, before all the data about how much we bought during the pandemic. So I just had this moment of like, this is so dumb. We did this in this other excessive period that's now gone. The Gilded Era is over, and thankfully I had a kind of writing program partner who was like, no, this is very relevant, and she kind of kept me to push me to keep writing. And as it turned out, it was very relevant plus. So during the pandemic, we collectively as a society bought more than we've ever bought, because it was an easy, fun, distracting thing to do. And all the numbers, the retail numbers went up, and certainly the online retail numbers went up, but that makes sense. But just American consumerism was just at an all-time high. And so I do think people are trying to sort out some of that now too. Like, what was I doing there? It was such a nice dopamine hit when Amazon showed up with a package for me, but what did, now I have this spike ball set that I didn't really want, or whatever it is. So yeah, so anyway, thank you. I'm really glad, and good luck to you in your project.
Other thoughts or questions? If there aren't any sort of top of your mind, we can also linger a little bit more informally. I just want to say, for me, the borrowing and the repair are the things that probably stay with me most for their implications of a different kind of sociability, because also in the repair, chances are you don't have all the skills, but someone else might have the skill. You have to go find that person. So, and I found myself thinking a lot about the mutual aid networks that have cropped up during the pandemic that had a certain purpose during the pandemic, and their purposes are changing, and I think are becoming, there's a lot of possibility there of sharing resources and sharing skills, and it's beginning to happen. So I think and I hope that the project is part of a larger, let's dare call it movement, because we should need movements. So with that, that's just another way of thanking you, both of you. Please join me in doing that. But first, I want to say a practical thing about books, because I'm a bookseller. And books are not stuff. If you want a book, you can get it signed down here. I'll be upstairs. You can just pay on the way out. All right. So thank you both.